You almost made it. We are through a super packed day, and up we have the next and the last panel of the Staking Summit 2022. Alan will be moderating Rank High or Die Tryin, Validator Rankings Unpuzzled. Welcome on stage, Dimitri from Stakewise, Elias from Radial Labs, Tyrone from P-Stake, and Izzy from Lido Finance. Welcome them with a huge applause.
All right.
Hey.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, thanks for making it through to the end. It's the last panel. Yeah, and looking forward to it. As you can see, we've already started on the beers. It's going to be a bit of a meta discussion, a bit philosophical. And just wanted to remind everyone the after party is at 9 p.m. Yeah, and a big shout out to Chris, who's unfortunately sick, and I had to take a spot in this panel. But he did all the work, he does all the VPP stuff, so yeah, if you need anything from Staking Rewards, data related on providers, reach out to him. But yeah, let's kind of start off with why ranking's needed. So Izzy, from your perspective.
Yeah, hey guys, I'm back. So ranking is needed because it helps us get introspection into, well, by us, I mean, what do we need it specifically for Lido, into how our operators work, how our validators work, what value are we providing to our users and the ecosystems that we inhabit. Rankings don't necessarily need to be purely numeric, they can be qualitative. Rankings can expose preferences of underlying ecosystems like culture, ethos, what kinds of things different networks want to maximize, and then give this information to liquid staking protocols so that we can make decisions around how do we allocate stake, who do we partner with, who do we work with, and how do we work on making better products served by better operators.
Super. Agreed on all accounts. Maybe if I was going to riff off of that a little bit, I would add that ranking is something that humans do sort of innately, like lists are all around you. The World Cup, the leagues of football and all kinds of sports are lists top down. So besides that innate thing, I think ranking also, and the whole systemic thinking and methodology behind actually putting a ranking methodology together has the potential to spin up like a lot of new and interesting products, right? And all the separation that goes into categorizing and ranking validators specifically can power a lot of innovation downstream. You can think of things like indices, you can think of things like bundles and all kinds of different configuration of resources, which I think are super, super interesting, and we haven't really explored much of that just yet.
Yeah, I think maybe one point to add to that is, in the end, one of the reasons we have rankings, like from a liquid staking operator perspective, is to really protect the users of the liquid staking protocol to be part of like an event such as slashing, where the really poor performers are kind of taken away out of the set because of those rankings. So in many ways, like we typically look at rankings where you want to look at like the top few performers, but in an industry like this where decentralization is so important, you're actually not doing the rankings just to know like who's the absolute best, who is the top. I think in this sense, like we're often looking at rankings like who are the ones that we really don't want to be part of it, and it's mostly like excluding some of the players where there is a huge risk of negative effects.
Yeah, totally agree with the guys. I think, like from Stakewise perspective, I can add like we use rankings to in V3 to distinguish well-performing vaults from not good performing vaults, and because if you run staking in a permissionless manner, there should be a way for you to provide some information to the user, like based on the metrics, based on the data that you can collect, how well different operators perform, and that could help them choose the right staking provider for them and make sure that it's the stake that they send is secured and there is a small chance of getting slashed in that case.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Great points. I wanted to go back to Elias' discussion we had yesterday. I don't remember the exact quote, but something along the lines of, don't trust, I'm going to find out everything I can about you. But I wanted to, for the ones that don't know Rated, if you can just give like a 30-second intro to actually how your rating system works, and then follow up with how you're diving deeper and how you're digging deeper into the rabbit hole.
Sure. So what we do at Rated is we basically seek to bring like a super high level of transparency into the workings of the Ethereum beacon chain and basically shed like a bright light into the infrastructure layer of Ethereum. Now, we have come up with this methodology that we call the Rated Validator Effectiveness Rating. And this is basically our view of how a validator at the index level, and then a composite of indices, which could constitute an operator, right? An operator is really like, from a beacon chain perspective, a composition of indices bound together by some sort of agency. And so we have constructed this rating so that we're able to encompass and capture in a one number how well a validator is actually performing their work, right? A validator is, on Ethereum, is tasked with various jobs that aggregate up to proposal duties and attestation duties, but there are like a lot of ways you can slice and dice and look into the specifics of what composes these two tracks of work. And then you can basically score how well a validator is performing those jobs on like a spot basis in a specific epoch, for example, and then across epochs, and then across multiple indices, so that you can start building upwards to like a profile of an operator, right? And why is this interesting? Well, we think it's interesting, one, because it gives you like a really easy to understand, but also like accurate snapshot of performance in different time frames. And how well a validator has been, an operator really has been performing their work on chain is, to some extent, the best predictor of how many rewards they stand to earn in the future. Because if you look at rewards and you try and predict rewards off the back of rewards, you're effectively auto-regressing rewards on rewards. There's like a bunch of noise that exists in there, right? In terms of, maybe on the proposal end, now that the execution layer exists, you got like a real payday because there was like an NFT mint or an exploit or something in a block. At the same time, you could have participated in like a sync committee round in looking at a specific window, which is like this really highly paid duty, but it's not like super core to consensus. And then you could be down for like a bunch of other rounds, but then still have higher rewards than your comparables that were up all the time, they were performing their jobs correctly, but didn't participate in the sync committee round. So this is kind of how we think about things, but this particular methodology only looks at like on-chain performance. And like Izzy touched on before, there's actually like a wide range of things that you could be looking at when you're trying to like ascribe metadata effectively on the useful life of a validator.
Maybe just one quick thing to add. As you were talking, I had a beer thought. Like a lot of times people confuse like effectiveness with or performance with profitability, but the one may lead to the other. Like good performance generally leads to good profitability, especially over long time frames and obviating for volatility and things like that. But there are things on the Ethereum network that are basically duties of nodes and validators that do not necessarily either accrue rewards or penalties. So rankings allow us, or at least the work that we do in order to create rankings, to surface this data and then find ways to use that to like offer additional information about how good a validator is at doing their job, and also the most important thing, supporting the network. So you can have validators that are like technically highly profitable, but maybe underperform in certain senses, which has to do with like propagating blocks timely, certain types of attestations that are not rewarded or penalized and things like that. So the rankings help us to additionally like get this information and make sure that we take that into account as we make decisions around where do we want to delegate stake.
Yeah, totally. If I may like add something to that, if if you think about proof of work and proof of stake, they're both algorithms that have security as an output. The difference is that is in the input level. And so proof of work, the input is electricity and computing power. In proof of stake, you have value at risk, the stake itself, and operational capacity of the operator, operational excellence, whatever you want to call that, right? Like all these rankings and this data are basically the, at least insofar as the on-chain footprint goes, is a proxy for the operational excellence part of the equation at the input level of proof of stake.
Yeah, valid point. So, in a sense, going to you, Izzy, and yeah, also, Dimitri and Jeroen, how would you, and like the work you do, what would be the best way for you to translate your qualitative data into a trustworthy source for Elias to use on-chain?
So this is, I think, like one of the most difficult problems that validators, staking protocols, and any kind of like abstraction layer on top of staking has to deal with right now. How do you take data, which may be metadata, it may not be metadata, it may be like indirect data related to the organization that's staking or the effect that it has on the network around it, kind of like a gravity well, if you're thinking about like space-time graphs and things like that. Bring that data on-chain to the extent that it is importable on-chain, and then use that in a verifiable way to drive algorithmic considerations for staking reallocation, because that's where we want to go, at least as Lido, in the horizon of like 5 to 6 years. So there's separate research programs around this. Where do you find good sources for this data, right? Who can provide this data? And are there perhaps like indirect proxies for this data? Can you do zany things like creating betting or prediction markets around whether a validator is likely to fail or not? Or where are they located? Perhaps they put up a bond, and then the only way for this to be challenged is if somebody produces a proof that the validator isn't where they say they are. All the way to getting data from governments, but doing it in a way that still preserves privacy, because that's one of the other really important things, especially as we think about solo staking and potential like regulatory overreach. So bringing that data on-chain, making it available for everybody to use, while at the same time maintaining its integrity and verifiability, I think are things that like Rated is chomping at the bit to figure out for sure. But all of the staking protocols definitely want to include, as I'm guessing, also staking v3, in terms of like how do you rate your vaults? How do you provide risk scores for those? How do you offer those risk scores to users so they can make better informed decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that, like, there is still like a lot of things that is hard to measure off-chain. And like that's already a challenge, like a lot of things like geographical location, like client diversity, and many other things. But like also bringing that on-chain, that's like another problem that is already like goes the next. Like if we already have like a good observability on the off-chain side, like okay, let's do that now on-chain so we can like build contracts around that, make decisions on who gets the next like 32 ETH, let's say, stake, or let's say who among the operators is not performing well and should be penalized somehow, or like build insurance mechanism on top. So that data is very valuable, of course, and will, I think, enable a lot of applications on top that liquid staking providers can, and any protocols can use for their functioning. And yeah, I think like for us it's also like measuring the performance and making decisions on, not making decisions, but provide the as good picture about different providers as possible. And if that's possible to do on-chain, that could also help us to, let's say, set a different like LTV to the vaults, so that you can mint like if you perform well, if you, let's say, have at stake as an operator or something, then you can, let's say, mint more OSIF token because of that. So it enables a lot of possibilities for different applications.
One thing I think kind of like want to discuss like with the rest of the panelists, kind of to see at which level can you actually go from something that is literally like trust or reputation based, at least to start with, to like a fully on-chain type of analytics or ranking system to kind of create your full validator set. It's obviously, it's one of the things that we are trying to think of, but also like would love to hear like the thoughts in the space, because it is quite challenging to honestly like go for a validator set and say, look, this is now fully based on on-chain rankings, because they almost never give the full picture, and to have all data on-chain is also not that straightforward. And at some point, I think we might just have to accept that there is that factor of not everything can be measured on-chain, and this off-chain aspect is just a part of the business that we are in. I think that's one of the things I like want to discuss. And then another point is like, at which point is the network itself somewhat responsible for having validators that are all well performing? And I think maybe for Ethereum it's slightly different, where I mean, everyone can kind of be a validator, and like there's an unlimited amount. But many of the Cosmos chains have, for example, 100 validators, and that's a limited set. So somewhat the network itself can control by certain parameters, like whoever comes onto the chain, the requirements there. So maybe there is something like in the middle that kind of sorts out that liquid staking providers don't actually have to think about it. They just say, look, we delegate to the full set, because every validator on this chain is actually awesome and is performing perfectly fine. So how do we get from the state that we are in now to kind of that state?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's no, and there will never be like a one true answer to these questions. That's why like the market mechanism is beautiful. Like, and the different answers that are given will be basically different configurations that instantiate as different businesses, different protocols that make different design trade-offs. And say one protocol might go for like a fully algorithmic set, entry, exit from the registry that makes up the validator set of the liquid staking protocol pool, whatever that might be. And another might go for committee-based, we'll look heavily at off-chain data and so on. And that's like a boon for users, because users now get to have like a choice between, okay, I can, if I feel more comfortable with the trade-offs that protocol A is taking, that's where I'll put my money. Conversely, if someone else wants to go with protocol B because that's what they feel more comfortable with, that's what they'll do. So that's, I think, as far as your first question goes. As far as the second question goes, it's interesting to think about. I think Izzy will probably have like some really good thoughts there. But the sort of meta point about it is like, are networks aware of themselves, and to what extent, right? And to what extent like networks affect decisions on themselves, which is a very deep question to be pondering, arguably.
We need to graduate from beers for that one.
That's right. But it's interesting to think about if networks will ever, or if they even should get to that stage, right? Because in reality, like, you know, in Ethereum, at least there's like a big debate about, it's not really about network awareness and the network being aware of itself, but like how neutral a network is. And I think like if a network were ever aware of itself, it would stop, like it would start eating into the neutrality property of a network.
Do you guys think that there would ever, like, if we do reach a point where all the validators are great, like, are we doing something wrong? Where no one is pushing to be better. So either the protocol isn't engineered to allow better validators, or none of the validators are trying to be better than the rest.
It's all subjective. And it depends, like even on the tightest variance, there is a distribution, and there's a bottom 10% of that distribution, and there's a top 10% of that distribution. So it depends how you cut it, right? Like numbers like express a state of the world, but then like people can flip and beat and compose these numbers in whichever way they like, right? And that's also like the beauty of it.
I think it's an incentivization question. So if there aren't adequate incentives, either for like people to improve or organizations to improve and perform better by whatever better means, it's not necessarily always like profit-wise, then that is a failure of the system, because it eventually probably means that the system itself is not sustainable, because there's always some sort of like entropy in systems. On the other hand, I think we need to be careful, like Elias is saying, that so there's always variance, and we also always need to consider that variance allows for diversity. So if we too tightly try to control variance based on potentially the wrong factors, it can be ruinous for protocols and underlying networks. And that's kind of where the point that you were making earlier about like the consciousness of networks, or like more broadly, I think the social layer comes in. So a lot of times the social layer like advocates for things superficially or based on short-term profit motives, but at the same time, especially in certain networks, we see that there's very long-term minded participants that drive things based on like network health, which is a very nebulous concept, you know, if you're not just looking at it from an uptime and how fast our blog's propagating perspective.
And sustainability, right?
Yeah, and sustainability, for sure.
So like the whole diversity, client diversity, relay diversity, just like really spreading your bets, spreading your operation, spreading your configuration, mitigating risks so that you don't go belly up as an operator, as a pool, as like any configuration of keys is like plays to that long-term mindedness, right? And these are things that, yes, are quantifiable, but they're way beyond performance. They're a wholly different thing. And like just again, aggregating upwards a higher order into like the whole rankings idea, just like the mere fact that this data is surfaced helps the network sort of coagulate quicker and helps coordination among the different operators happen quicker, because now we have like a frame of reference of where the network is at this point in time, or has been over like a period of time, and can help the network respond to emerging challenges like, I don't know, a bug in some client or some sort of configuration issue that is widespread across validators and is eventually resolved.
If I understand V3 correctly, Dimitri, you basically allow people to, there's different pools that have different, validators, nodes. And I think that's quite a nice approach compared to, if you give your effectiveness rating, it's great, but if everyone kind of relies on that one number, everyone's going in the same direction. So you might have like diversity on clients, diversity on, everything else, but if everyone's trying to reach this one sacred 100% effectiveness rating, that is potentially also something that should be diversified. Because you're always looking at this, you're looking at it from one point of view and you're trying to reach that number. I'm not saying it is, there's potential for that.
It's an objective point of view. We're merely translating the spec, right? And when the spec changes, then we'll adjust the effectiveness rating to reflect what the spec says. But you're right in that it is only one variable, right? It is only the variable that is performance, and performance says something about the present of the existence of a validator or a validator operator in its past. It doesn't say much about its future. You can come up with some, okay, maybe it illustrates like what the potential is if the past is like, if the future is like the past, but then there are other things, right? There are, client diversity. That's not part of the effectiveness rating, and we're not really planning to make it ever part of the effectiveness rating, because the effectiveness rating says one thing, which is performance according to spec, how well you're doing your job. But your job is not to run in a multi-validator operation to run 4 different clients. That's not your job, according to the protocol. Doesn't care, right? The protocol is not even aware of this thing. Similarly with how you treat producing blocks on Ethereum, right? It's different. Like also, like I realize that we've focused this conversation like quite a lot on what's happening on Ethereum, because we're all like mostly working on on Ethereum. It takes up a lot of, at least like we do. But you can, like Ethereum being the most sort of mature of protocols out there, I think can give you like a pretty good mental model of like how to approach this whole ranking idea, this whole like attributes idea, which is kind of like the meta point after like ranking, and translate it across different protocols.
Yeah, but the comment I was going to make with Stakewise is that you still have this randomness from user selection on which pools to utilize. So there might be things that if we go for a rating number and everyone tries to follow that, it's still man-made. Maybe the specs are also man-made, right? If everyone tries to follow that, but by adding this kind of variable randomness, you might add some more long-term sustainability with the protocol.
Yeah, well, I think like in terms of like rankings here, like the whole, like in V3, for example, there is the ranking for each vault is composed of different components, and there is like different ways of you can fetch those different variables. It's basically the whole performance of the validator, like over the time, also like MEV, priority fees, like some additional things that you can collect from the consensus and execution clients. You can compose like a good metrics around it and have a good picture over the time, like how exactly that validator is performing or that operator is performing. And the longer that ranking persists, I think the better picture it provides about that operator, because someone could run like well for a month, let's say, and then like just dump the whole system, and it could be like that users are maybe like seeing like, okay, this operator performs well, let me join him. But the more, I think the more operator has good performance over the time, the higher should be the ranking of that operator, because then it gives a good picture about that operator for the users.
Yeah, that's a fair point you make. I think we didn't actually mention any kind of, how long has the validator been running so far, and you're the first one to bring it up. And going back to your comment about Ethereum being the most mature, in some ways, yes, but actually probably a lot of Cosmos validators have been running a lot longer than Ethereum validators. But yeah, what do you think, Jeroen? Like from your obviously not being slightly further away from Ethereum as the rest of the guys, any inputs there, like what the difficulties are for you and any kind of unique insights?
Yeah, I think, Cosmos obviously is like true proof of stake, and I think has a lot of experience in that. But on the other side, like on the Cosmos side, the liquid staking is only like taking off now. I think on that side, Ethereum is a bit earlier, slightly because of the different, the different architecture of the different systems. But altogether, I think we look at it in a similar fashion. Like you want to try and rank certain validators. One thing though that I think is slightly different, or one thing we have seen so far is like when you try to pull certain things and let's say, okay, we go for this ranking and you have user A, he can basically delegate or basically stake with that based on that ranking, and you have user B that kind of prefers another strategy and like wants to do that. It kind of harms fungibility on a liquid staking protocol level, which is never a good thing, so that kind of comes with liquidity issues. So I think on that side, like Cosmos side, we're still learning a lot, but the interesting things are still ahead of us, and I think there it's slightly different, where you have so many different chains that are now starting to talk about interchain security, where you have a set of validators that is securing not only one chain. In the first example will be the Cosmos Hub, which is secured by the set of validators that run on the Cosmos Hub, but then they will also be able to kind of provide that security to other chains who don't want to run their own validator set, and basically other chains will be able to provide that. And that comes with a whole bunch of different questions, like if you get slashed on one chain as a validator, do you get slashed on another chain? There are talks about mesh security, which basically makes all chains kind of interlinked, all providing security to each other, where you basically start having a network of validators, which then again like comes into the rankings. It's like, okay, like what is now relevant? Because I'm not looking at just your validator ranking on one chain, but I'm looking on it on a multi-chain level where all these chains are kind of connected through IBC. So it kind of comes with a whole bunch of complexity, and at this stage I think it's still different from Ethereum, but at some point I think these things will kind of converge, and like people from Ethereum will look at Cosmos and people from Cosmos will help out on the Ethereum side. So I'm mainly excited because we're still so early in this, and I think that's my main takeaway in this is like this is actually really cool stuff to be thinking about, and yeah, just for both ecosystems to look at each other and like see like how do you guys tackle different problems in different ways or same type of ways. So, yeah.
So I wanted to, going to Cosmos now, DPoS, slightly different potential on-chain data you can get is Elias mentioned that on-chain data is a proxy to, real-life operations. Do you think there's any good, potential proxies for like the sentiment for the validator? So looking at like, delegation flows in and out, as a way to kind of say, okay, maybe there's something wrong with it, like, maybe there's like something on crypto Twitter about them or something else that could actually use that as like delegation flow as a proxy for these things. Do you think that's something that could potentially work?
I think it's tough because everyone has like as a validator their own value proposition, and some validators, they might be big on like community and like they provide a lot of services to the community like podcasts and whatever, and a lot of other validators might be focused on the infrastructure, and everyone has like their own type of ways to kind of gain delegations, and some of them might have very few delegations but are actually super good validators. So I think it's very hard and like subjective in a way, which kind of goes back to my point from earlier on. Maybe we just have to accept that not everything can be measured on chain, and I think, me at least, I'm fine with that at this stage.
Yes.
I'm not. We're going to put everything on chain.
So I didn't mean, the actual delegated balances, but if there's, a lot of like transactions going in to actually undelegate from a certain provider, that would still count as on-chain, on-chain data, but that probably signals that there's something wrong off-chain.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. Like, I think you can't just say based on like delegations going in or out. I mean, that's probably too like short of a metric. And
there's probably also like a lot of market dynamics, right? Like what sort of like, I mean, do fees really interweave with sentiment? And fees have like a bunch to do with how delegations are routed, right? Who was it, like Sika, way back when, in like, maybe it was 2018 or 19, in Cosmos, where they appeared out of nowhere, and they got like the highest amount of stake, and they just kept like accruing stake from way out of left field, because they had a zero fee strategy that no one else had. So they undercut everybody, and they got a bunch of stake on board, and I don't remember how the whole like story resolves, but like that was like a real great example of how like a fee strategy has to do with how people approach delegation decisions, right?
I think maybe one point that I think is really interesting is that the fact in Cosmos it's very easy to redelegate from one validator to another, which makes the market quite competitive in a space because you can redelegate, and there are certain like parameters, like you can only redelegate once every, I think, 7 days or 21 days, depending on the chain. But currently, I think you don't have that in Ethereum, so that kind of, I think, makes it completely different. So I think that's an interesting thing to look at as well.
Yeah. What's interesting about Ethereum is that like liquid staking, in a sense, is a way to express delegation. That is not, because delegation is not part of the protocol, it's liquid staking that has come to kind of supplement that, right? Also facilitated by the fact that there's like a very mature application layer, but we're talking about like all these lists, all these criteria, all the ranking, like these are like views that different entities express, and then they provide them to the market so that like, okay, if like I want to like redelegate, for example, from Lido to like a different liquid staking protocol, I can just, as an end user, I'll just like sell one liquid staking derivative and buy the other, right? And now like I just redelegated my stake from one validator set that is selected with certain criteria to another.
Or did you?
Or did I? I guess we'll never know.
Well, no, we will, because we have on-chain data.
Let's go.
Maybe one more question. Your opinion on having centralized exchanges as validators. What's your opinion there? If the on-chain data is good,
The market is the market. That's like I have no opinion, right? Like also like the way I view our sort of role in the ecosystem in kind of like the 3x3 alignment matrix from Dungeons and Dragons, right? We're like lawful good to chaotic evil. We're like, and we gotta remain true neutral, right? And in that sense, exchanges perform a useful function for the ecosystem in helping users transact. And by merit of that, they have acquired a bunch of assets. And by merit of the opportunities that are provided by staking for yield on these assets, they have become massive players in the proof of stake game. Fact, right? Is it good? Is it bad? Like, sure, like, I mean, I could have a preference. I could have a preference for like transparency. I could have a preference for transparency on reserves, right? And like, you know, protocols like Lido, like Stakewise and so on are awesome because they provide that level of transparency that products from centralized exchanges, for example, might not, right? At least not yet. And I think that transparency is like a real standard setting that we should all sort of look up to.
And actually, like, rankings help bring that transparency about, right? Because the more you have discussions around data, the more you have discussions around like provenance of stake and performance, and these centralized exchanges are running their own operators, or maybe, sorry, their own validators, or maybe they're actually also working with third-party operators to run some of these validators, and trying to understand not only like the impact or potential repercussions, right, that a centralized exchange gone wrong may have on the network, but also the power that they end up giving other actors, right, that are actually also actors in the decentralized part of the network. Like, we can surface that and start to make better informed decisions around who really controls what, how much of it, and what things could go wrong with the network, and then make better informed decisions around, all right, now that we know that, what do we do about it? Yeah. So it's an incentives issue, right? And as DeFi, if we want stake to go away from centralized exchanges, we have to find ways to offer better products or more appealing products. And on the other hand, we also have to hold them, like, do the things that we're doing now, being transparent about performance, about operators, about validators, so that they eventually also have to do the same thing. Yeah. And if we can bring about like a better vision and future of the network, then we can rationalize things better.
Yeah, fair point. Like fair point. So before we start, let's finish here. I think we don't want to give anyone nightmares mentioning any centralized exchanges today. I think we're also a few minutes late. But anyone, if you want to get into philosophical discussions on data, I would say give it another 2 or 3 beers for these guys, and they'll be at the after party for any discussions. So yeah, thanks a lot, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'm so fucking cute, bitch. I'm so fucking cute. Attitude abusive, but I'm so fucking cute. Kawaii, cutie on the beat, cooking up the heat. OMG, booty like Kylie, but shouty Taiwanese. Did you see her on the magazine and Times Square on the screens? Just like Reed, Fenty on my cheek, Savage on his D.
All right, so this was the last panel for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to do the closing ceremony now. I think this was a great event. It's amazing to have everyone here. The first ever very big in-person staking conference, network agnostic. So I think, yeah, that's like the first ever event like this. It's been great, and we are looking forward to welcoming you again in 2023 for the next Staking Summit. For now, let's give a big round of applause for the whole Staking Awards team for organizing this. So everyone here did an amazing job, and I'm really proud of everyone. So we're just gonna take some pictures, and yeah, we're a team of 20 people. And yeah, everyone contributed to the success of this, so this is amazing. Everyone was here, like we did interviews and everything. Cool. Yeah, let's take some pictures, and yeah, I hope everyone gets excited for the after party. Awesome. So we're gonna slowly close down here. We're gonna move out the chairs and then meet again at 9 p.m. There will be an open bar here, and we're gonna have a DJ playing up until 2 a.m. in the morning. And I just want to say one last word. Mia, you did an amazing job organizing. Like, she did the most work for like organizing this whole event, together with Katarina and the whole WAGME team. Thanks for everything. Woo! Awesome. So yeah, see each other at the after party, and let's get excited for the Staking Summit 2023.